Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gabriel.io, and I'm here today with Lee Lorenzen, the CEO of Altura Ventures in Monterey. Good morning, Lee. How you doing?
Good morning, Mark. Doing great. Happy not to be in Dallas today. It's very cold there. So
Yes, and it looks just like my background right
yeah,
now.
there you go.
And I saw Monterey on TV on Sunday. It was a little cold, but not like this.
Yeah. Well, I think we're the envy of the nation. Always around. Well, sometimes it's raining here, but most of the time it's really nice weather about this time of year. So.
Yeah, usually, I mean, I actually am looking out. It's pretty nice here, and I'm actually going golfing this afternoon. So,
Oh, cool. All right.
so to
Well, we
start,
have we have hardship duty today. Let's get started. So.
yeah. So to start with, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Sure. It'll have to be brief. I've had a lot of work experience. I'm really a startup guy. So I've started like 32 different companies. 25 have failed completely, losing my money and the investors' money. So I've learned a lot of ways not to make a startup. I've had a few successes along the way. I'm 61 years old, so I've been in the industry 40 years basically. And some of the successes were Ventura Software, which we sold to Xerox, Fractal Design Corporation, which we took public, shop.com, which had Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos as investors. I invented the multi-vendor shopping cart that's essentially built the model that Amazon uses for 63% of all their sales, with third-party merchants being going through a single shopping cart. So I've had those were sort of it's kind of like you go to Vegas and you have a couple of wins, and then you think you know how to gamble, and then you lose for a long time, and then you have some few wins. So what I tell my wife is we're still playing with the house's money. So
That's good.
yeah, that's my background.
Well, that's a very interesting background. So, what's Altura Ventures all about? You're not a VC actually. So, what do you do? Who do you service, and what makes you different?
Yeah, so through all of these different startups that I've been investing either my own money or helping people raise money, the legal entity that I've used for all of that is Altura Ventures. So I kind of view Altura Ventures as an extension of myself when I'm working on other companies, and then somewhere along the lines I'll have my own startups that I'm actively the CEO of and actively involved in running. So Altura Ventures' core view, and you can look at it at altura.com, is really to help the entrepreneur who is maybe at the beginning and hasn't had a lot of startups before. And so there's typically things that they don't know how to do. It could be getting their corporation formed or their LLC formed, could be structuring a board, could be finding their initial investors, could be working with their founders just to make sure that the company ownership is appropriately divided. When you have this many startups and you've failed so many times, just like Edison, a lot of ways not to make a light bulb. So they're not really failures, they're kind of educational opportunities. So what I really try to do is pass along that education to the companies that I work with.
Very interesting. So, you're in Monterey. Are most of your companies that you start? Or I'm assuming they're not in Monterey. I'm assuming they're all over the country and the world, right?
Yeah, certainly the ones that I'm working with right now, they tend to be all over the world. There is one that's here in Monterey, very interesting startup. If you want to hear that story, I can tell a little bit about that. But in most cases through my career, the ones I've been actively involved with as CEO have been in Monterey, Pacific Grove, sometimes as far north as Scotts Valley. That was Fractal Design. But in general, I've kind of kept things mostly close to home. But we always, like when we were doing our Mac to Windows porting technology, we had like 60 companies we worked with, and they were all over the country and world. And it was kind of amazing what you can do even back then, just working remotely from your customers.
Yeah, cool. And well, why don't you tell us about the current one in Monterey?
Yeah, it's a company called skinhappy.com. And it's the focus of it. It's a teledermatology company. There's a doctor who has created her own formulations of different products for like acne, rosacea, dandruff, balding, aging. And she wanted to take what she'd been doing in a clinic and extend that out in this time of COVID and even beyond that time to working with patients remotely. And dermatology is one of those things if it's not skin cancer or something that you have to operate on, you can actually just do a lot of it with just a picture of the person's face and then prescribing the appropriate medication. So we've been helping them with fundraising, and also I've played kind of a sort of a CTO role because they have to work with engineers. They have an engineering development team in Ukraine and Russia, and they needed someone who, if you're not I have a computer science degree. If you're not an engineer, it's very hard to translate the founder's vision into how the engineers have to actually implement it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm the same. I actually do the same thing as you. I've had 40 years in IT, and it's a different language that technical people talk, that business people talk, right? And
Exactly.
that person in the middle that's got to, as we say, translate.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's and it's not just translating the vision, it's also helping to as you know, helping to navigate, the, I guess what you'd say is the different work styles or the different
Mhm.
ways in which people, if you've never worked in high tech, you think, oh, the engineer said it's going to be developed in 2 weeks. And yet you're developing something that's never been developed before. And so it's very likely that's going to slip and for good reasons. And so just navigating the politics around that between the developers and the business people. So.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but whenever an engineer gives me an estimate, I always double it.
Yeah, it's and except for when you run into those engineers who've already done that doubling before you, and sometimes you have to hold their feet to the fire and push them a little bit. We could talk a long time about how to manage engineers, but
Yes, we could. And
it
I've
is
actually
definitely an art.
I've had a few in my life that actually, if they say 4 weeks, it's done in 4 weeks. They're
Yeah,
just that good. There are some out there that understand how to buy their, they understand their distractions during the course of the day.
exactly, exactly.
So yeah, if we could just code all day, it'd be fine, right?
Yeah, and if nothing ever changed along
Right?
the way, if it was if what we were building actually stayed the same as
What you
what we
mean?
originally asked for, so.
You mean there's actually a thing, such a thing as scope creep? I've never heard
Yeah,
of.
yeah, exactly. Scope creep and just things that you could never have figured out
Right.
without actually writing the initial pass. And what I found and why I don't really like schedule so much, which sounds strange for someone in between these people, is that many times when they implement the first 10 or 20% of something, you'll have new ideas about what you want them to implement. And if they
Mhm.
just stay focused on the schedule and implementing what they were told to implement, they might hit the schedule, but 4/5 of that was just wasted time because you could have seen from the first thing they did that you should go in a different direction.
Yeah,
So,
very,
uh,
very, very true.
yeah.
So now that you're in venture, I mean, you're a venture company.
Hmm.
Do you find that you're finding more and more people looking to start companies that have revolving around remote, like this company, and right?
Yeah, I think all of the companies that I currently have as clients have none of their own developers.
Hmm.
They're all sort of they're domain experts. And they've set up the business. They understand the marketing components. Um, but what they don't have is any in-house development teams. So they're all 100% remote development teams.
Yeah, very, yeah, and we're seeing that too. And do you think that's going to be the trend going forward? Once things go back to normal, or I mean,
Yeah, I don't
let's
think
talk.
there's going to be a going back to normal. If normal means going into an office and working, I think I had two sons, and they both used to work for Facebook. One still works for Facebook, and what he was telling me is the the assumption. This was like 2 or 3 months ago. They made this announcement that the default assumption at Facebook is people will from now on work from home.
Yeah,
So they've
and
got this huge, amazing headquarters, in San Jose, and I guess they'll grow fast enough where there'll probably still be some people there, maybe, but they're not going to be adding more buildings, and at least for a long time, I wouldn't think, because it's
I
just
would.
so people have gotten so used to it, and people have figured out that mostly your productivity is not going to go that far down. It does take training though to work from home,
It does.
and so the good news is that the whole world has been trained at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's just the fact that we're on this Zoom call, I
Mm.
never would have done a video conference call pre-COVID, and
Yeah.
yet now all my calls are Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Because you just basically say, "Wow, it is actually pretty nice to read the body language and see the person," and
Mhm.
that didn't exist before. So
Yeah, true. And it's actually been 11 months now because it was March 16th when the stay in place was ordered.
yeah,
And I've driven by that Facebook campus many times, and I actually wonder what are they going to do with all this space because no one's going there now. And
yeah, yeah.
and
It's yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, eventually things are obviously going to get back to normal, and maybe over time. But I think what's the analogy that I've used is that, and this is more just not around development, but other issues.
mm,
Our parents or grandparents that went through the Depression, there's a whole group that came out of the Depression as forever savers. They were
mhm,
never going to get themselves back in the position again. So I think there's going to be a group of people that roll out of this that just are going to stay at home. They're just going to
Yeah.
wear masks everywhere. Doesn't matter if COVID is not really a threat anymore. They're just going to,
Mhm.
it's just mentally that this was such a disruptive thing that they'll just shift into, I'll just be a stay-at-home kind of person. So
Yeah, you're probably right. Now, as someone who coaches, startups, do you actually tell them now, hey, you really don't need to invest in an office, right?
yeah, in fact, Altura Ventures, we had an office from 2006 until about 5 months ago, and we just shut the office down because it's a cost, and
Mhm.
it's not like we couldn't do anything that we needed to do here. Periodically, if I need to meet with someone, then I can just, we can go and have some socially distanced experience out, at a restaurant or wherever. But
Mhm.
it's just not, when you think about it, at least in my case, I'm sitting here in my office and I've got my 3 dogs
Hmm.
sleeping on the floor, and it's not a huge space, but I don't need a lot of space. Enough room for my computers, and off we go.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. And do you think that, going forward, things are going to be, like I don't see them going back to the way they were, but I think it's going to go to more of a hybrid model. Would you agree with
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, I think that certainly in larger companies, most of the companies I've been involved with are smaller, 10 or less people, and you can, and also pretty independent silos in terms of what they're working on.
Mm.
So not a lot of need to be in the same room working on a marketing plan or something like that. I mean, I do think that there are opportunities where you're going to want to bring people together in a conference room. So if what you mean by hybrid is that people might spend 80% of their time working remotely, or 60%, and then have occasions when they get together to do the things that just work better together. With this one company, Skin Happy, we have 3 meetings in the morning, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which are kind of like connecting up with the developers in Russia and making sure everything's going there. Those are obviously all done remotely. And then on Tuesday, we have once a week, a 3 to 4 hour meeting, which is in person. Even through all of COVID, we've kind of maintained that.
Mm.
And that's been super valuable, because I think the bonding is, these were people I hadn't worked with before, and actually none of the team had worked before together. So we brought the kind of core group of 4 people together. And I just think that face to face, in the same room, there's just a level of connection and
Mm.
bonding that you can get there that you don't get through
Right.
this. So.
And that actually will bring me to my last question is, before you actually take on a client, in the old days, I'm assuming you would want to meet them in person and really get to know them, right? And COVID kind of put an end to that. How did that affect you?
Well, I think it's a little bit the inverse. I think the clients would have wanted to meet me
Hmm.
face to face, because they're the ones writing the checks. And so, but if I were investing them and I was writing the check to them, yeah, I would definitely want to meet them face to face. So I still think that even in the midst of COVID, I think you could still, when you really needed to, get face to face with someone. The one exception would be air travel. I
Hmm.
haven't done any air travel since this whole thing started. So I've pretty much basically been in lockdown mode, and on that regard, I haven't been perfect in the other areas of social distancing, but certainly not going to an airport, getting on a plane. So that's been cut to zero.
Yeah,
So that'll be good to get back.
will be good. Yes.
Yeah.
And you're fortunate that if most of your meetings that are in person are basically in the Monterey area.
Yeah, for this one client, that's the key one that requires a lot of that kind of meeting. The other one's a little bit further along, so it's more just advice.
Hmm. Very cool. Well, Leo, I want to thank you for your time today. It was great talking to you. I wish Altura Ventures a great 2021. And
Yeah, and if any of your listeners have a startup they want to help raising money, just let me know. Go to altura.com.
okay, thank you. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mark.